Mmmm. And of course, today we have Darth Plato with us. How are you today, Darth Plato?
I'm good. Thank you for having me on. Morning, all.
Yes. Good morning, everybody. It's a pleasure to have you on today, Darth Plato, because today we're going to be talking about the last episode of the part 3 series, Napoleon and Josephine, a love story. And you and I have reviewed the first 2 parts here on Positive Fandom. And there was a lot to talk about, especially in the last episode, episode 2, where a lot was going on, and they kind of left us off at a cliffhanger, Darth Plato, where it looked like Napoleon had sort of come home from a campaign or something, and he was very upset with Josephine, and he threw all her stuff out to the curb. That's very it feels very housewives-ish, when you talk about something like that. All the stuff was thrown out. This person got thrown out. They took all their belongings and threw it to the curb. Did this really happen, Darth Vader? Because it feels very soap opera-ish. It doesn't feel like something that might have happened during that time period.
It did happen. It did happen. That's pretty mild compared to some other episodes. Actually, there was another episode where they got into a pretty good fight, and he got so he got so steamed he went outside with a rifle and started shooting swans in the pond.
Oh my gosh. So there's a lot of sort of dramatic moments between them that are well documented. Is that what it is?
Yeah,
Well,
you're
honestly,
you're talking about a guy that wrote like 13,000 letters a year on average. There's an extensive written record of what he did and what he thought, even from his own hand. And that's just not just from his own hand, not including what other people are writing.
okay. So, that is very interesting. I think that there's a lot that the series is trying to cover and dramatize. And maybe this is one of the situations where they feel people could relate to is, kind of tossing everybody's belonging, all her belongings to the curb, if you will. There's no curb, it's all tossed out on the street. And she's actually racing to find him, to meet him. And it is actually equally dramatic when she does find him at the house or at one of their palaces, and only to find out that he wants to commit suicide. Darth Plato, did this really happen?
Not at that time. There was a time where he did consider killing himself, but that came later in 1814 for a different reason, not involving Josephine. So,
Yes.
but that incident where he's in the room, the door is locked, he's saying, the door is shut to you, you're no longer in my life." There was a showdown like that happened in 1799, and the children were outside the door, and Eugene showed up, and Eugene reason that that got him to open the door, and they reconciled.
His daughter?
The son, Eugene.
Oh, okay, I'm sorry. I didn't hear that. Okay, so he's the one who coaxed
Yes.
his father to go ahead in the door. You don't have to do this, Dad.
Mhm.
It's very interesting that they show that, and that the entire family kind of witnesses the drama of it all, because it does feel very dramatic. It's certainly something that um, you know, you certainly feel for the family going through something like this. Um, and it does have quite an impact on camera after they open the door, and they do see Napoleon there. Um, and they kind of allude to the idea that Josephine doesn't necessarily care where they live, and I'm sure she was fine living in palaces and things. I mean, I wouldn't say no to anything like that, especially during that time. But it seemed like, I'm not quite sure. They didn't really challenge the notion of Napoleon's ambition in this version of the story. But I have a feeling that there were a bunch of people who didn't necessarily want him to go ahead and become, any higher station than he already was. We already knew his family was a little different. They didn't like his choices. But why would anybody throw a rock, let's say, in this through their window while they're having this shindig, were they constantly in fear of being assassinated? Were Josephine and Napoleon in constant danger of being assassinated?
Well, Fouché was the minister of. He was the chief of police of Paris, which also meant that he was Napoleon's spy master, and he did report that, and I quote, the air is full of daggers. What he meant by that is that the British were keenly interested in having Napoleon assassinated, and he believed, Fouché believed, that there were as many as 40 plots in operation at one time to kill him. That number probably exaggerated, but there were plots to kill him. What you see depicted in the episode is called the Cadoudal conspiracy, which was headed by an emigre. He was a man that was in France that went to Britain to escape the revolution, Georges Cadoudal. He was a very tall, very big man, very formidable man. He mastered a lot of accents. He could speak English, he could speak with an Irish accent. He was trained by naval intelligence, and he was very involved in the plot to assassinate Napoleon, as was the Royal
Interesting.
Navy.
Yeah, I mean, we even saw a point where, they managed to get a powder keg and they were going to time it perfectly. So, there's one guy, the lookout, and when the carriage passes, he waves his hat, it's time to light the fuse. Okay, we're lighting the fuse, and the powder keg, of course, for dramatic purposes, although it may be true, the powder keg seems to miss Napoleon and also miss Josephine by mere seconds. But it's still quite traumatic. They're very frightened and shaken by this.
Yeah,
Did
just suffice to say that really set him off. He was very angry about that.
Yeah, I'm sure he was pissed off. I'm sure this really was like, I've had enough. And it looks like in the story, he starts to go to, Talleyrand and a bunch of other people saying, where is this person? What's going on? Who is the person who's doing this plot? Was the person that was, let's say, executed, was that person the guilty party?
His name was Le Duc d'Enghien. That was his name. He was an emigre. He had left France to escape the revolution, and he was not involved in a plot. He denied it from the beginning. He did not deny being involved with the emigres, helping them out, giving them money. He had it written down that he was going to join the Austrian army when it invaded France and give assistance to the downfall of the Bonaparte government. He was not guilty of that plot. Now, when this whole thing started to crystallize, like looking for who was responsible after the explosion, Talleyrand and Fouché were pretty convinced that d'Enghien had something to do with it. He was only 20 miles across the border, and I think he was Saxon. And Talleyrand was actually the one that first suggested that he should be put down. Napoleon grabbed onto that, and he ran with it. He did send men into Saxony to seize this person. He sent one of his people, I don't recall who, he sent one of his people to the elector of Saxony to explain what he was doing, why he was doing it, because he was essentially invading another country. d'Enghien was brought back to France. In the show, they depicted him as being put to firing squad right there in the scene. That's not how it went down. He was brought back to France. He was sent to a castle that was a very high elevation. It was the highest elevation castle in all of Europe, because he was afraid that the British would try to break him out or try to assassinate him. There were other men involved in this plot, and that did kill themselves in their cells. So there was some fear that might happen. Cadoudal was apprehended sometime after that, and he did hang. d'Enghien was put to trial. The outcome, his grave was being dug outside the castle while the trial was going on, which gives you the idea that the outcome was predetermined. He was dead man walking, quite literally. But by the time they got to that phase, it was everyone except Napoleon apparently that he actually was not involved in the plot. But Napoleon, but for whatever reason, just honed in like a laser and would not back off. He wanted to see this man hanged. Or was he hanged? Yeah, I think he was put the firing squad. Yeah, Caudill was hanged, and Donyan was put the firing squad. And yeah, Josephine even pleaded for his life at one point. The series depicts that she was involved in his apprehension. That's not true. He was not involved in that.
Well, it still was quite dramatic, and no sooner are we left with this plot that seems to be foiled, if you will, for the sake of dramatic license, than we find um, we find Napoleon kind of justifying to Josephine why he should be emperor. Or at least I think that's what the scene was trying to do. What will this mean, let's say, for Napoleon and Josephine, for example, who I'm sure Josephine never thought that this was even going to be coming down the pike?
Well, to be honest, these events are connected. The plot to blow up Napoleon and the elevation to the emperorship are connected because of the plot, because of the near miss. His government, his court felt that he was he was such a central figure in the new France, the new government, the revolution, the very idea of revolution was embodied in his person, Napoleon's very being. So he had no children of his own, and so it was felt that there had to be some sort of institution brought into being that would preserve this legacy in case he died. Something needed to be in place that can continue that legacy, and the best way to do that was for him to have children. Now there was a meeting of minds to describe well what exactly it was going to look like, and from that meeting it was proposed that he be made emperor. It was not the first idea that people came up with. There was uh, the idea of he becoming king was immediately rejected. They weren't going to do that because they had just executed their own king not that long ago. Why emperor was better? I don't know. I don't know what people in the room were thinking, what their reasoning was, but that's what they decided to do. Napoleon, was it vanity? Maybe. I'm not going to say he wasn't a vain person. I think he probably was, but I don't think that this is some scheme to on his part to say, well, I'm going to make myself the king of the world. I don't think it's quite that simple. I think he liked the idea of being emperor in that he could negotiate on even terms with the emperor of Austria and the emperor of Russia. Even though they didn't really see it that way, they saw this guy as an upstart. Who's this guy? He thinks he's from one of the great families of Europe. He's just a low-born bourgeois from Corsica. But that's it. That the red outfit is his consular his uniform.
Yeah, it certainly would seem that he wouldn't be the type of person who would become emperor. This seemed like such a far-fetched idea for them. They seem happy, they seem okay, and now all of a sudden, um, this heir is critical now. Having an heir is incredibly critical, and of course, Josephine was not able to
That's right.
do this for him,
Yeah.
and
Yeah, that was brought to his
it's
attention early on. It's like, well, if we're going to do this, do you really want Josephine to be empress? Because you need someone that's going to be able to have kids, and you haven't had kids yet. Because by this time, it's 1804. This conversation taking place in 1804. They've been married for since 1796. They've been married for 8 years by this time, and there's
mhm.
still no kids. So it was, but Napoleon wouldn't hear of it. Like, no, Josephine's going to be my empress. So I don't want to hear it. He wouldn't broker any disagreement.
Yeah, it seems like that's what he wanted and that's what he was going to get. It was very
Mm-hmm.
interesting. And of course, this coronation is infamous. Or maybe infamous is the wrong word. Famous, one of the most spectacular coronations because of what he did. And of course, well, most people I think know what he did at his own coronation. Funny part too, of course, and I don't even know if this other part is true, but apparently they were not married. Is that true that they weren't married? They're about
Uh,
to, have this big coronation and they're not even married, Darth Plato. Was that true?
well, they had what's called a civil union, which nowadays no one really bats an eye at it. But in those days, the idea of a civil union, that is a marriage that's outside the church, not conducted by the church, was considered very unusual because the church has been involved in this since since time immemorial, since the Dark Ages, before the Dark Ages. So there were a lot of people that just couldn't get their mind around that. Like, what? Well, were you married by a priest? No. Well, then you're not married. It doesn't matter what you said on. It doesn't matter what the piece of paper says. What is marriage? Is it something that comes from the state, or is it something that comes from the church? It's you see. Uh, there's a scene. There's a scene in The Crown very similar. It's like, well, where did the power of the monarchy come from? Does it come from does it come from the church, or does it come from the government? The coronation is held in a church. It's not held in a cover. It's not held in a building. It's the same. It's the same mentality. It's a very old mentality, dates back to God knows how long ago it came from. But there were a lot of people that did not recognize that they were married because it was a civil union, and so Napoleon decided, oh, well, I'm just going to put this to bed, and we'll just get married for real. At that point in France, well, also because of the anti-clericalism of the French Revolution. Rousseau was a French writer who was very against this. There's a lot going on there that we're not getting into, and it'll really just suck the oxygen out of it when they get into it. But they were very anti-clerical, the French revolutionaries. So they completely separated the idea of the church being involved in marriage, and it does kind of carry over today. We do have civil marriages today, but they did other things too. Like they banned the use of the word Monsieur, Madame. You couldn't say these words. These words were banned because it presupposed that people were that they were in something other than an egalitarian society. Well, in an egalitarian society, we have to be citizens, citizeness. You can't say Monsieur, Madame. You cannot say that. You cannot say these words. So that's really where all this comes from. By the time Napoleon's in power, it's not necessary to continue these things, so he discontinued all of that. The revolutionary calendar remained the same. He didn't change the calendar like the revolutionary did. The French revolutionaries outlawed everything under the sun, literally. They even outlawed the calendar. They outlawed units of measurement. Um, But yeah, for Napoleon, it was an easy fine. You want me to get married? I'll get married. And also it bothers his mother too because his mother's like, well, this piece of paper doesn't mean anything. So
Well,
they're actually married by his uncle.
it is kind of interesting in a sense because, they go from kind of having maybe a little bit more of a freestyle kind of thing. And then now suddenly it's become incredibly formal, and there are a lot of procedures that need to be handled and in place. And certainly it wasn't necessarily so shocking to see that, Josephine say that we're not married. And how is this going to happen? What was really interesting is how much effort they put into getting dressed for this event, all the preparations and everything,
Mhm.
and yet to kind of omit or not have already taken care of that. It does seem very funny, but I think it's when certain things like this or certain questions are asked, and people will say, well, I just want to make sure, you were married before, are you divorced, or is your husband still alive, or whatever is the story. We need to know for sure right now, just so that there isn't an issue with why, the person you're with is not here. Or if there's any kind of obstacle, when you get to, we've seen in a lot of shows where the person will say, is there any reason why this person cannot be married? Please speak up. And there's a definite reason as to why something like that would happen. It's because of situations like this. Certainly, he would need to be married to her. They'd need to be a married couple in order for them both really to assume this role of power. I think it's probably written down somewhere. It would have been very odd for them not to be. And so it
Well,
gets
yes,
really
because
interesting.
their first marriage, they were only concerned about their peers. They were only concerned about what the Jacobins thought of them, the revolutionary. By the time 1804 is rolling around, he's concerned about what the courts of Europe think about him. So that's the difference. And
Absolutely.
the courts of
Um,
Europe were not revolutionaries.
yes, exactly. And it is kind of interesting. A lot of those people are still around. Just because the action has ended does not mean that the sentiment isn't still there. And I also think it is very interesting in the sense that this famous picture, everybody knows this famous painting. But can you imagine being there that day when it was time? So the wedding takes place, maybe I don't know exactly how soon or how far off it was, but it seems like the wedding took place maybe minutes or an hour or so before they were about to be crowned. And and in a very unusual thing, and it's not actually depicted, although it might be shown here. Yes, I think she already has a crown on her. He's going to crown her, or she's going to crown himself. He has this situation where he crowns himself. He's supposed to be crowned, I'm guessing, by the bishop or whoever is there, who's supposed to crown him to make him the emperor of France.
But
But
all that was choreographed. The series made it look like it was a surprise, that it was a shock that what he did. It was actually choreographed, and everyone knew that he was going to take the crown and hold over like this and say, "I proclaim myself emperor." He was going to do that.
has this been done before? Has anybody just gone ahead and taken that and declared themselves emperor?
He felt that it was the best thing to do because that France was emerging from the French Revolution, that he embodied the revolution, and he was really doing it to in his sense, safeguard the revolution. That was really his mindset for doing it. Um, he does right after the fact that he regrets doing it the way that he did because it suggested a vaulting, and I quote, a vaulting ego, because it gave the impression that he was an egomaniac, and that was the reason why he did it, in this monstrous ambition. And he was conscious of the fact that it looked like that, but after the fact.
Sure, of course.
The involvement of the Pope is the whole thing is very choreographed. It's meant to recreate what happened between Pope Leo III and Charlemagne back in the year 800, because Charlemagne was crowned on Christmas Day, the year 800, and that was very choreographed. He traveled outside of where did he? I think it was Aachen. It was Aix la Chapelle is what they call it today. He traveled outside the city, and the Pope met him, and they had this meeting out there. Everyone, they all knew what was going to happen, and then they went in, and then they rode together into Aix la Chapelle, side by side, and then there was this coronation. What happened in 1804 in Paris? I guess it was Notre Dame. I'm not sure where it was. I guess it was Notre Dame, and that's why the Pope was there. That was the only reason why he was there, is because the Pope was present at Charlemagne. He should be present here. It's not really mentioned in the series, but in the coronation there was a lot of Carolingian that were decorated in the hall at the scene. What does that mean? It's a callback to Charlemagne. And Charlemagne was the founder of what's called the Holy Roman Empire, the First Reich, which the Austrian Empire at that time considered themselves to be the guardians of. They considered themselves the continuation of Charlemagne's reign. So they did not like one bit that this was all going down. It's like, well, you're trying to replace Charlemagne's legacy. You're co-opt it for your own, and they saw that as naked aggression against the history of Europe and the House of Habsburg. So that exacerbated affairs with the Habsburg, and it was exacerbated the following year when it didn't show this in the series, but the following year, Napoleon also declared himself king of Italy, using language like the Iron Crown of the Lombard, which is language that dates back to Charlemagne. And this was really the compelling reason why Austria joined the alliance against France the following year in the War of the Third Coalition.
Now, it is interesting that you bring that up, and of course, we're going to talk about that. Although I'm not going to have as much to say about that war as you will, because I just notice how it seems like it's Napoleon against everybody in that fight. But to be honest with you, after this entire, it's they did a beautiful recreation of it on the screen. I have to say, I think I really enjoyed how this series recreated the look of the coronation, if you will, if you want to call it that.
It did. I'll complain one thing now. In the depiction of the scene, there was a gallery where people were kind of up in the gallery there. That did not exist at the time. It is in the painting of Jacques Louis David. You just showed the painting a little while ago where he
Mhm.
crowned Josephine. When David was originally consulted to make this painting to commemorate this event, he asked at what point of the ceremony should he depict the crowning of Napoleon would be the most obvious thing, and he was told no. If you're going to do the painting, make it of Josephine. That's why the painting is him crowning Josephine. Napoleon insisted that the painting be done like that. He was also told a number of other things too, like he needed to paint his mother being present, even though she was not. His mother didn't want anything to do with the coronation. She left Paris and went back to the south of France, not necessarily because she rejected his emperorship. She might have. She was a very down to earth person. She probably thought that this is all ridiculous. Why are we talking about this? Wait, you want to bring the Pope to Paris? Are you crazy? You want to talk to the Pope? You go to Rome. Like I said, she was very down to earth. That's why she wasn't there. But Napoleon insisted that she be included in the painting, so that's why she was in the painting. The galleries in the background was not there. Divi put it into the painting, but for whatever reason, the series does depict the galleries being. It's a minor detail, but I think it's kind of shows that the showrunners might have been going by the painting more than by what actually happened.
Yeah, certainly. The production that they did here for this series, I think it couldn't have been a better reproduction. Although, of course, we know it can't be 100% accurate. Gee, Darth Plato, this thing looked spectacular. It looked
Mhm.
very elegant, beautiful. Certainly, everybody was dressed the way it looks like, or very similar to the painting. Very opulent and an amazing event that was taking place, and I think that they captured what it would be like if you were an onlooker who was looking, if you were lucky enough to be there when this moment happened. That's what it must have looked like.
Yeah, it was
Darth
also very
Plato,
cold.
yeah,
It was
yeah,
very cold. It was very cold there. There was no indoor heating in those days, so and it was in December, so people were shivering in the audience.
yes, certainly. And, I think it's interesting, of course, when you become an emperor or you have a title like this, when you're pretty much a ruler like this, as Napoleon found himself to be, he finds himself at a point where his own family are there, and they never kind of are too far away, are they? At least in this depiction, where there's this point of, kind of saying who's going to have this title and who's going to be married to this person. And there's a lot kind of things that were kind of dished out. And I think that even at this point, when Napoleon has been made an emperor, his family still are really very difficult.
Yeah.
Especially his mother, who says, something, if you want to keep this going, and I know that we already talked about this and discussed this, but if you want to keep this whole thing going and be successful, you have to produce an heir. And the only way to do that is to, since you and Josephine are not successful in doing this, the only way to make this successful is for you to check out someone else. And that's pretty much what happens. And, I think what's interesting about this is they show a depiction. Here's Josephine, played by, I can't remember, Jacqueline Bisset, the actress Jacqueline Bisset, and they show her kind of, it's nighttime and she's waiting for Napoleon, I guess, to come to her chamber. And of course, Napoleon is in a chamber with someone else because he's trying to produce an heir. There's only one way to do it then. It's not like today where we have different options. Um, But would they have fought? Would Josephine and Napoleon have actually fought over this child thing in the way we see it here? Because you and I both well know that it was pretty commonplace that sometimes people couldn't produce an heir. This was not an unheard of thing. It's not, kind of a singular thing, and it's not something that isn't well recorded in history. It was the maybe even one of the main reasons for getting married back then. Certainly to continue the family line. So, was was it realistic that they were in a situation as they showed in this miniseries, kind of fighting over it, when we know that that's a lot of times the
You're
point of
referring to the scene
marriage
where he's
all
with
along.
that girl, and Josephine watched that girl go down the stairs. Are you talking about the scene you're referring to?
Yes, I think
Yeah.
so.
Yeah, I think that's Elizabeth Devaldi. I think that was the girl's name. I don't think the whole thing went down like that. My understanding of what happened there was I don't know who initiated it, but apparently she was just some pretty girl that was she was Josephine's maid of honor. She was one of her ladies in waiting, lady in waiting, and uh, and she ran off and they got together with they got together. And then Josephine suspected that that was going on, and she confronted them, and she was very angry about it, and the girl had to be sent away. And I don't know what came of it beyond that. Uh, the whole thing about staging this because he had to prove his virility. I don't think it went down like that. I'm not sure why they depicted it like that in the series. Something like that might have happened, but it didn't. It didn't involve that girl at that particular moment in time.
Yeah, and I think what they were trying to kind of intimate was the notion of what was to come. This union, this what seems to be a very happy union. It's no union is perfect, but right after they get married, right after this crowning, now all of a sudden there has to be an heir produced, and so they made it quite clear that Napoleon is looking for suitful women who could possibly give him an heir. So now it's all intertwined in these campaigns that Napoleon is having. Is he continually on campaigns even after having married Josephine?
Oh yeah, he was having affairs going since Apollo
I
Four,
mean, military campaigns.
the military campaigns. Yeah, um, between 1801 and 1805, he was at peace.
Okay.
Well, at least in continental Europe, Britain was still at war. There was a brief period of peace in between Britain and France that was in May of 1802 until March of 1803. That's called the Peace of Amiens. There's a reason why that came about. It was initiated by the British government, the Addington administration. That there was a period of about a year between the Pitt government where the William Pitt resigned over the Catholic Emancipation scandal, and then Addington came in, and that was a complete disaster. And they wanted to make a name for themselves. Or we're going to end the war because the war wasn't popular in England. It wasn't. There was a lot of war weariness. And when Pitt came back in a year later, they went back to war. They declared war on France, not the other way around. So it's an amusing thing that Napoleon never actually declared war on anyone, but
Yeah.
I'm not sure what difference it means. So between 1801 and 1805, he was at peace. That is between the War of the Second Coalition and the and the War of the Third Coalition. The First and Second Coalition were wars against revolutionary France, directed against the revolutionary government. After that, from the War of Coalition 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7, personally.
Interesting. Um, and I think what also is quite surprising is, I think that Josephine did expect this was going to happen, but I think she feared, or they both feared, or at least the way it was depicted in the story, um, that this whole idea about getting a divorce, because it seems very very odd how at
Yeah,
one moment
yeah. What?
they're celebrating this incredible event,
Mhm.
maybe the most incredible event of their lifetime together. This major, and it is it is a big deal. It's a big deal. This is not an everyday event for anyone, right, Darth Plato? It certainly is not something that happens every day of your life. But then this was maybe their highest point, at least um, from if we're looking at it from that point of view, where they're together and it's a celebratory day, they're happy. Um, and now they're presented with a situation where um, it's the opposite. It's kind of like an undoing of this marriage, Dark Plato. And of course, it's not so shocking. We've heard of other monarchs changing spouses, if you will, or deciding
Well,
that
well,
they
sure.
were no longer going to be with that spouse. But goodness, this one, the way it was dramatized in this miniseries, Darth Plato, certainly was quite touching. They were just broken. Um,
For sure.
Having to go up there and just be completely broken. It seemed like Napoleon was broken. She was broken. Do we know anything about this? Did this incident take place, or was it a much more quiet kind of handwritten thing?
Sure. Sure, there's marriage drama here. Sure, absolutely. It's not doesn't rise to the eighth. Now that's marriage drama. The was it Henry the Eighth? It was somebody. I think it was Henry the Eighth. The what precipitated the episode where they divorced was actually the death of Hortense's son with Louis, and the death of their son, who was about 5 years old. They show it in the series where the child dies. Um, yeah, he was about 5 years old, I think. He wasn't very old. He wasn't a baby. He was a little older than a baby. But Napoleon was content to having his heir come from Hortense and Louis. If they showed it in the episode earlier in the episode where Louis meets Hortense at the bar at the ball, and there's also the scene where he's telling Talleyrand that he has to marry. That's where that set into motion. When the baby dies, that really shocked. It really sort of brings Napoleon back to earth. As well, I can't rely on anybody else but myself. I have to produce it my own heir, and that's really the catalyst and pushing forward the divorce and having to find somebody else.
Yeah, that's a valid point, and I think that they wanted to make it seem dramatic because this is supposed to be their love story, and their love story needs to have some kind of investment in where both of them feel like they've lost everything by having to do this, because neither of them, I don't really believe either of them. I don't think he would have married her if he didn't want to marry her, or make her empress if he didn't want to. I don't think he was forced into that, as you and I are both discussing. And historically, it doesn't indicate there was any forcing for this. This is something that he wanted to do. And so, unfortunately, they found themselves in a difficult situation
It
with.
wasn't an excuse. This is not some, oh, I've had it with her. I'm going to use it as an excuse to divorce Josephine. That is not how it went down. He regretted doing this very much so. He went and did it because he felt it was for the good of the state. This wasn't some excuse to get rid of Joseph, to get rid of that baggage, off with that old battle act. That was absolutely not where it was coming from. And years later, he wrote about this extensively. Years later, saying that he thought that it was ultimately a mistake to do this, at least the way that it went down. And there are plenty of historians that'll point out that the turn, the turning point in his success as a state really starts to go the other direction from this point on. Yeah, that's true, but that could just I don't know if the divorce has anything to do with that to do with that, but more than a few people have pointed that out.
Well, I think it's very interesting. And I think that, remember, there are turning points in every story. And if there is a turning point, this certainly is a big one, because it's almost like they've had the best moments of their lives at this coronation and that day. And now, it's the reverse of that. That's not good news. It's not good news to announce that you're getting divorced. It's not good news. It is an unhappy event. It's a sad event, and it certainly is something that can have an impact, not just in saying that you are no longer together, but it has other repercussions as well. So certainly it's like the best thing that could have happened to them was having this union and being together, and then at the same time they find themselves in a situation where they have to kind of dissolve it in a way. And that experience is going to have an effect. It's not just oftentimes the individuals, but it can have a ripple
Well,
effect. So that is actually, there is some weight to that when it comes to relationships and perhaps politics, especially since their story and their personalities and perhaps their union is a lot of what people either supported or related to. And so, yeah, somebody's relationship could have a profound effect on how a nation or an outcome of certain events turns out. Now, he's still going on these military campaigns, Darth Plato, and of course, some of the biggest and most important campaigns in here. This is not about necessarily focusing on his campaigns. It's about the love story between the two of them. It's a lot of this is about how, incidentally, he was somebody who seemed to never stop um, being involved in some kind of military situation. And I know you said there were some points where he wasn't, but this when I looked at some of this information about the campaign, and I'm not a military strategist, and I'm not going to pretend to be, and I'm not even going to try and explain it, but it looked like it was Napoleon against everybody, like all of Europe.
or the
You
other
know,
way around,
I'm sorry.
or the other way around. They were the third coalition, the fourth coalition. These were not events that he precipitated. He wasn't looking for these conflicts. He sent out peace feelers to London constantly after the capitulation of Russia at the conference of Tilsit, where he joined in arms with the Tsar of Russia in friendship, and they talked about dividing Europe between them. He sent peace feelers to London. Like, okay, now will you talk about peace? Because I have the entire continent pacified now, and London still wouldn't hear of it. So they weren't going to back off. And I don't know, just the way the stubbornness of the way it was. I don't know what was going on there. But Napoleon wasn't going on. It wasn't his idea. It really wasn't. If it were up to him, he would have just spent all his time improving France. That's what he wanted to do. That's what all his writing was directed towards. He was a man of science. He was a man of literature. He was a man of art. He was a patron of all of these things. He had his own uniform, the Institute of Science. He spent a lot of time with that. He was a true luminary of the Enlightenment. He was.
Yes, and
By the way, the series does depict very well the divorce and how it went down. I thought the series did handle that pretty well.
yes, and so it seemed like it was Napoleon against everyone else because there was no one who joined Napoleon's side. So it was him against everyone else. And that's not a situation you necessarily want to find yourself in. Um, I think it was very interesting to even go into a battle like this, knowing what you're up against, because you're not just fighting one person, you're fighting different nations. And, then all of a sudden you have to think about the strengths and weaknesses of not just one opponent, but four.
Well, sure, but
Um,
think also about how that came about in the first place. I mean, these countries have all been at war with France before Napoleon ever came to power. So this was already all set in motion. It wasn't at first. It wasn't personal. They went to war with France because they did not want the revolution imported to the other countries. The guillotining of the king was a terrible precedent that these other heads of state did not want to see. They didn't want their own subjects getting this idea. Well, look at the French are doing. They're throwing down the institutions and beheading the king. Well, they don't want to see that in their country, so of course they're going to go to war. Look at when the whole thing's all said and done in 1815, the Congress of Vienna. What was the central theme of the Congress of Vienna? The central theme there was to preserve the institutions of Europe against revolution. They didn't want to go through and something like that again, and so they pledged the heads of Europe, talking about continental Europe now. Britain didn't want to be involved. That the continental Europe pledged that if revolution broke out in one country, that the other country would come to the aid of the besieged country and would militarily intervene. And you saw that in 1848 when there was revolution in Austria, and the Emperor of Russia brought his army to help put down the revolution. So this is really what this is about, and Napoleon, in his own language, is the embodiment of the revolution.
Yes, and
Was a
thank
big
you.
part of that. And also, he was heavy-handed in his diplomacy too. So there was something there. He was very heavy-handed, and Talleyrand warned him about that. You're being very heavy-handed in your diplomacy, and this is probably going to bite you in the future. And sure enough, it did.
Yes, and thank you, Tom Jr. Jackson, for the $3 super sticker. Thank you so much. I
Hi,
so
Tom.
appreciate it. We are all goof people. Tom Jr. Jackson, my collaborator and friend and moderator. Tom Jr. Jackson says it's a bird giving a thumbs up. Well, thank you so much, Tom Jr. Jackson, for that $3 super sticker. That is such a kind thing to do. Tom Jr. Jackson says this is a great stream, and again, I'm learning a lot about Napoleon Josephine. Certainly, it is a lot that we are all learning here with this really wonderfully done dramatization of their lives. Um, and I believe that this dramatization was nominated for a few awards, maybe some Emmys.
Hmm.
Certainly for costume design, they deserve a lot here. This was certainly something that they excelled at. This costume design for this particular series, but
For sure.
it is kind of interesting seeing Armand Asante play Napoleon here and the attitude that he has towards these military campaigns. I also think when we see this, and having somebody that you are with who is going to be going off and fighting like this, Josephine must have been very worried about this. I don't know whether there is any record of how she felt about this, but it seemed like a necessity. And I would
Well,
just wait.
she certainly didn't like Eugene going to war. She was against that, but Napoleon was very clear. Like, look, if he's going to be a man, he has to go to war. He has to experience these things. And Eugene was had been part of war since he was 15 years old. So he was a soldier pretty early on. So he was pretty experienced.
Yeah,
He did travel to Egypt. He did go to Italy.
and they
Um,
did show earlier in the series that that's how I guess Napoleon, um, Eugene was giving a sword. He was turning in this sword. I believe it
well,
was
yeah,
his.
that was something that was engineered by Josephine. That was a way to send Napoleon an invitation to come meet her. That was really Josephine initiated that. So she sent Eugene to the topographical office with the sword, and the reason why the sword was there because the government had said that the common people have to turn in their weapons because they wanted to decrease the violence. They want to defang the sans culotte, the Parisian mobs. They wanted to call that all out. And look at Josephine's family. They were the furthest thing from sans culotte. They absolutely weren't. I mean, she was almost guillotined for goodness sakes. She was scheduled to be guillotined in 4 days before the fall of the revolution. So he went there, and my mother wanted to ask about this sword, and he saw that as an invitation to go meet with Josephine. That's exactly what it was.
Absolutely. And it is very interesting to kind of look at that. There would be expectations of him having to become somewhat as a person in the military, especially since we do get a scene. They give us this courtesy scene of, let's say Napoleon's talking about what kinds of titles they may or may not be getting, and what types of rank even. There's one where
Yeah,
someone is
that seems kind of funny. That seems kind of
a
funny.
major, and they get something different, but I'm sure that there was a great deal of expectation from Napoleon after this happened, and seeing them kind of walk out of the throne room, if you will, um, kind of in this lap of luxury. It is very interesting when there's even a scene where Napoleon is kind of looking at these paintings around him, kind of trying to figure out, at least what I thought the scene implied was Napoleon figure out what his place in history would be, more or less. I think that that was very interesting too, because it was just pretty remarkable to show the character himself. And of course, this picture is when a set production
Yeah.
picture. Um, on set, there's Armand Asante wearing the
Yeah.
regalia
Mm.
for Napoleon for the role he played, and there are other production
Right.
assistants who are in the photo. But
He definitely would compare himself to Caesar and Alexander, which is another reason why he wanted to have an heir, because Caesar Caesar's legacy continued through his adopted son, and Alexander's domains disintegrated in the Diadochi Wars, where all his people turned against each other for and partitioned the empire. And he Napoleon did not want that to happen here. In case something happened to him, he wanted there to be a smooth transition. He didn't want there to be periods of war like what happened to Alexander and Caesar.
certainly, and it is think about yes, Tom Jr. Jackson, they do look like paintings. They did such a great job of recreating this. I think this might have been the highlight of the series for me,
Mhm.
Darth Plato, seeing this coronation scene, which is something I would have liked for them to drag out a little bit more. I would have given them a little bit of artistic license for this to last maybe a good 10 to 15 minutes, just so I could see all the costumes and procession. And it may not have been anything like that at all, but just give me the fantasy. This is why we're watching this amazing thing. And unfortunately, like many stories, this one does start to fall apart after Napoleon loses some of those military campaigns. Jeff Plato, it felt like it happened overnight in this series. 1 minute, he's on top of the world, and the next minute, he's signing, like an abdication order.
Yeah, I know. They really skipped over stuff. Look at the first episode of the series takes place across 2 years. There's the opening scene where she's imprisoned and then she's out of prison. That's July 1794. They meet in October of 1795, and then they married in March of 1796. So that's about 2 years, a little less than 2 years, and the episode ends with him in Italy. That's about 2 years. The second episode begins. He's campaigning in Italy, and then he leaves Egypt and returns to France, and Josephine leaves the function to go race to meet him, and that so that's taking place in about less than 2 years. So all in all, that's about 4 years, less than 4 years. So 1794 to 1799. Yeah, that's about 5 years. 1794 to 1799. The third episode takes place again 1799 and then concludes in 1814. So that's 15 years. We're seeing 15 years of events being crammed into a 90-minute show. And so yeah, they're skipping over a lot. What are they skipping over? They're skipping over his entire military career. But to be fair, it is a love story, Napoleon Josephine. Uh, it's not a show about his military career. In terms of his military career, the turning point in his career was the invasion of Russia and the debacle there. That really was the turning point in the war, and the point of no return.
Certainly. And, of course, we all know what happened there. And, one of these days we can have a discussion about that. And we cannot get into that discussion
Mhm.
today. However, Darth Plato, he has to sign this, or he signs the advocation order. And, at this point, we already know that the two of them are divorced. They're no longer together.
Mhm.
However, they seem to be in the same circle still. They're not that far apart, Darth Plato.
No,
Um,
she retained the title Empress. He insisted that she retain the title of Empress. So in a way, you almost had two empresses at the same time. So weird because Marie Louise was an empress.
his second, I guess, the second wife,
It's
or
his
whatever
second
you want
wife.
to
His,
call her.
his second wife was the daughter of the Emperor of Austria. She was 18 years old, so he was older than her by about 22 years.
Right. And of course, marriages at that time, that would not have been so unusual. Um, Another very interesting thing here is that we learn, of course, he's going to be exiled to Elba, and Josephine herself is not well. There seems to be a lot going on between the two of them, still having. Uh, I'm not going to say that they were seeing each other every day, but they seem to imply that they still had some kind of a relationship or saw one another every once and again. Um,
Well,
how much did they actually see each other in those last few days?
I don't know how often they saw each other. I don't know when the last time they saw each other. I know that they saw each other 2 years after the birth of his son with Marie Louise, and that was in 1811. So I guess that would have been 1813. So I know they saw each other in 1813. So because he invited Josephine to meet Napoleon Jr. Um, they were living. Their private residence was in Malmaison, which is someplace I'm not sure where it is. It's outside of Paris somewhere. And Napoleon decided to just give her the entire property. He gave her a number of other property. He gave her one of his properties up in Normandy, which is which was a really nice piece of real estate. Um, he gave her allowance. She spent a lot of money. She spent a lot of money. So that was definitely a fault on her part. Marie Louise spent a lot of money too, but not as much as Josephine. Um, and she was involved in the selection process. He after they were divorced, he did call Josephine to him immediately after, and they talked about his remarriage and what do you think about this. And so he did consult Josephine on this, interestingly enough, and she did agree that Marie Louise was a good match for him. Now, the drama behind the marriage, I'm sorry if I'm doing a run-on sentence here, but I just wanted to mention that the negotiation for the marriage with Marie Louise didn't quite go down the way the series depicted, where Josephine made it look like it was her idea to marry Marie Louise. Not exactly how it happened. Napoleon's first choice was actually to marry Anna from St. Petersburg, the sister of the Tsar of Russia. That was his first choice, even though she was only 15. But they couldn't work out a deal. Well, they did work out a deal. What Alexander wanted in return was for a promise that Poland would never be brought into existence again as a nation. There's a lot of politics behind that we can't really get into. And Napoleon had flirted with the idea of taking Warsaw, the Duchy of Warsaw, and elevating it to a full country and putting one of his relatives in charge. And that's what Alexander was afraid of, that he didn't want Napoleon to take one of his relatives and make them king or somebody of Poland. And he was willing to marry his sister to Napoleon for that. But for whatever reason, Napoleon decided against it. I've never seen a good explanation for why this was. It seemed like there was an agreement that was had that they were going to do this, and then for whatever reason, he just came into the room one day and said, "No, I'm not going to do it. No, I'll marry Marie Louise." And I don't understand why he did that. But that's what happened. He was going to marry Anna, and then he decided he would marry Marie Louise instead. And when Marie Louise was on the journey to France, she was met at the border by Caroline Bonaparte, his youngest sister, and she ordered um, Marie Louise to leave her cortege, leave all your property. You can't even bring your dog. You can't bring any of your servants. She got into Caroline's carriage, and they went all the way to Paris. Well, they didn't meet in Paris. They met someplace outside of Paris. It, and the details aren't important, but they did meet, and they are married. Um, what's funny about him meeting Caroline is that Caroline was married to Marat, Marshal Marat, who had replaced Joseph as king of Naples. Napoleon wanted Joseph to be king of Naples. He took Joseph out of Naples and made him king of Spain to stabilize the situation in Spain. All that did was make the situation much worse. Again, we don't have time to get into that. But Marat would replace Joseph in Naples, and Caroline was married to Marat. Now, the reason why that's significant is because they had replaced a Habsburg monarch in Naples named, um, gosh, what was her name? Whatever her name. I can't remember. Maria, Maria something, because she was actually the aunt of the Emperor of Russia. So she was actually the great aunt of Marie Louise, who was the sister of Marie Antoinette. And so that I don't know if this was done by design or Caroline went and did this on her own, but that could not have been seen favorably by the court of Vienna. That this usurper was accompanying Marie Louise to Paris in this marriage. The series, it doesn't show it in the series at all, but it was really bad optics at the time.
Well, it's great to know that, and of course, as you mentioned, it's not shown in the series here, but the series ends where we see that they have this final encounter with one another, where Josephine is not well, and unfortunately, she's not going to elbow with him, and no one. It seems like no one is going to elbow with him after this whole thing has happened. But I'm getting the impression that Josephine is really unwell, and that might be the last time that they ever see each other. To wrap this up, Darth Plato, is that the last time that Josephine and Napoleon see one another?
I don't know when the last time they saw each other. I know they saw each other in 1813. I just described that. I don't know if they saw each other again after that. I don't think they did. I don't. I really don't. She died in 1814, so while he was still in Elba. Um, she got sick. She was outside and got a cold spell and got sick and died. It didn't go down like that. The whole thing about his downfall did not go down like that. It absolutely did not. I would, yeah, that's what I most regret about the series is the way that was all depicted. What happened in 1814 was that France had been defeated at the Battle of Leipzig. They were outnumbered by 300,000 men. Not even Napoleon could prevail against those kind of odds. And the war was brought to France. Napoleon had wanted to mobilize the population the way that Russia had mobilized its population in a partisan war. That did not materialize. He tried to ambush the Prussian army as it was coming into France and tried to go back and forth between Prussia and Austria. He was mostly successful at that, but one of his trusted generals surrendered Paris to the Russians, and that really ended the war. He was very disappointed by that. Just suffice to say, what really set him off, and you asked me this earlier about did he really try to commit suicide? In 1799, he did not. In 1799, he did here, and this is the reason why he did, and that is that Marie Louise had fled the city with their son. He wanted them to meet at Fontainebleau, and she did not. She received a letter from her father telling her, look at France, Paris is about to fall. Do you know what happened to the last Austrian princess that was in Paris? He's of course referring to his aunt, Marie Antoinette, and Marie Louise took that for what it was. Get out while you still can, because I don't want to get guillotined. So she left the country and went to her father's house, and she never. Well, I just should say never. She did not write to Napoleon telling her what to do. And days passed, and Napoleon. It occurred to Napoleon. It dawned on him what had happened, and it brought about a sudden depression. And he did. He tried to kill himself. He had a phial of poison that he kept on his person, because while in Russia he had a close encounter with Cossacks, where Cossacks actually laid hands on him and very nearly dragged him off. That really happened, and since that day he contrived. I'm not contrived. He had a vial of poison, a vial of what do you call it? You drink it and you die? What cyanide or something like that. The poison, however, was not very effective because it had, I guess, past its expiration. I guess poison has an expiration date, so it expired. He tried to drink it, and he got very sick, and he was very noisy. He was in the middle of the night. He wanted to kill himself in the middle of the night so that no one would know. One of his servants heard him because he was retching and being very noisy, and he came in and got ashes out of the fireplace and made him drink the ashes of the fireplace, and he vomited it all up, and that's how he was saved. The following day was when his marshals came to him, and he looked terrible. The people who were there comment on it. They didn't know that he tried to kill himself, but they all noted how terrible he looked. Of course, he just tried to kill himself, and that's when he abdicated.
Yes, and so looking at this particular, let's say, series, I think they did a great job of showing this relationship that Napoleon Josephine had. And of course, their parting, just like the divorce, seemed very bittersweet in this depiction, but maybe a little too matter of fact at the end, where they are kind of being separated. And I do want to thank Tom Jr. Jackson for this $3 super sticker. We are all goof people. If you enjoy,
He was sent to Alba, but that was not his final resting place.
yes, and if you enjoyed, thank you so much, Darth Plato. If you enjoyed today's program, please do like and subscribe to the video. We're going to be covering, Darth Plato and I are going to be covering a lot more of these historical stories for sure. Also, just keep in mind that there is a new Napoleon story coming out soon. So we're going to be having conversations about Napoleon going forward. Also today, later today, at 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on the Burr Network, you can find my new show called PGS Moving Image, where we're going to be talking about the Planet of the Apes cinematic legacy at 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And also, guys, don't forget, I'm probably going to be streaming on Midnight Musings tonight with Robert and Lael, where we're going to be talking about the new announcements that James Gunn has made. Sunday, I will be back here on Positive Fandom for Sunday brunch. And I'm also going to be doing a live watch party as well on Sunday night for The Last of Us.
You got it going on.
I'm sorry?
You got it going on.
Thank you so much, Darth Plato. Thank you so much for that. It's such a pleasure to have you here. Darth Plato, where can people find you?
I'm around. I'm around. I'm around here. I'm a positive fandom junkie.
That's right, guys. If you want to get in contact with Darth Plato, you can come and contact me here, Positive Fandom, and I'll get the word out to him. Also, for Tom Jr. Jackson, his own YouTube channel. He just did a review for A Fish Called Wanda, which I just thought was fantastic. So do like and subscribe to his channel and check it out. We are all goof people. We also had Retro Nerd Girl here today, guys. Like and subscribe to Retro Nerd Girl's channel, as well as the Outcast Creative, who also has stopped by. And thank you so much for doing that. Yes, there is going to be another show. Many, many more shows about this topic coming up, and historical figures as well. Thank you so much. Darth Plato, it's such a pleasure having you here this morning. Thank you for taking the time to tell us everything and all these very important historical facts about this. Certainly, I enjoyed this series about these two most incredible people who had such a profound effect over history. Certainly was worthwhile watching, and I can't wait to do the next thing we're going to be doing. part 2 of Horatio Hornblower next Friday at 10 a.m. But we're going to continue with more things like this, everybody. So please do make sure you check out the channel and look to see what's coming up. And I do just want to say, on behalf of everybody who is watching this, thank you for checking in. Thank you, Tom, again. And no matter where you are in the galaxy, everybody, always please do remember to be kind. Take care, everybody.